Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second session of the Black Horse One Masters Symposium on the topic of the journey from a young horse all the way up to a Grand Prix champion. Now, we just listened to Hans Christian Mathiesen, and I think this was such an interesting and educating start to this symposium. And to mix things up, this session now with David will be more of a conversation. More of a question and answer style. And I don't think I need to mention much about David. You all know him. David is one of the most famous British coaches. He's the president of the International Dressage Trainers Club. He is the chair of the FEI Judge Supervisory Panel, and his exceptional knowledge of dressage principles have been put into practice at London, at Rio, for the Tokyo Olympic Games, as well as countless World Cup finals, the European Championships, World Equestrian Games, and so on. And David is now also the president of British Dressage. And we want to get right into it. David will talk about riding competences from a young horse to a Grand Prix level. And let's start right away with the first question, David. What is the most important aspect of educating a young horse?
I think one of the most important things is that people don't get the concept that the horse should learn to accept the bit very early on and not leave it. There is a perception that you must leave it long and low and not really push it into the contact. But I think they learn to accept the contact very quickly as a 3-year-old, and that they must keep that respect. Because once they learn to push against the bit, I think that you'll have a problem for the rest of your life.
Now, obviously, we don't want to have any problems for the rest of our life, so this was already a good hint to start with. And because I just forget to mention it, if you want to send in any questions for David or for the whole group for the discussion round, please don't hesitate. You can do this via questions@blackhorse-one.com. Send us an email, and we will read all of these questions. We will try to find the ones that were asked the most, and we will discuss about them. And for example, we already received a question from Beth, and Beth asks about very specific questions regarding teaching flying changes. So let's get back to this. If we can't make it in this session, we'll do it in the discussion round. But to start you off, David, I suggest we go through the different ages. So let's start with the age of 3. Is the age of 3 a good place to start with a young horse? Are they developed enough?
I think 3 years old is when they're developed enough to start them into work. And I think one of the most important things is to establish respect and control with the young horses. And that means on the ground, how you handle them, as well as when you start to ride them. I think, that I would always lunge my young horses, but I would lunge them pretty quickly in side reins to let them form a shape, so they learn very quickly that they must go in a shape. Because once a horse learns to push against the bit, I think it's very difficult, because if they push against the bit, they push onto the forehand. And that is something that we really don't need with the dressage horses. So for me, I would always train them in side reins to first respect the contact and carry themselves. And I would like to get that, fully established on both reins, that they could walk, trot and canter, be obedient to the voice. I think at a very early age, a voice is very important, that the horse learns to treat you as a friend, and you can calm it down or, sharpen it up a little bit with your voice and not have to use any other aids other than to back up your voice.
I do think voice is underutilized in our training to some extent, or from some people, because this also helps to build trust. Do you agree?
Exactly, because I think one of the most important things is that throughout the training of a horse to Grand Prix or to whatever it is, you have to build a relationship with it. I always say, when you pick up the reins, when you ride a horse, you should pick up the mind, because it's so important that the horse focuses on you and is really involved with you in this journey that you're about to take.
Okay, so we are still at this very early stage and early age. What do we need to keep in mind as the overarching goal?
Well, it's really established that it feels very confident, that it comes out confidently, comes into a shape, and will trot and walk. You can, to your voice, you can make it trot or walk or canter, and it's happily doing that in self carriage very easily before I get on. That's my, I need that established. I need them to, let's say, respect the voice, because when you get on, when you put somebody on, if something goes a little bit wrong, if they listen to the voice and that, you can quickly diffuse the situation. But it's very much getting the feeling, and you must always take your eye onto the horse's eye and be aware of how he's reacting, or whether he looks nervous or whether he overreacts, underreacts. It's very important to build this relationship very early on. I think too often people just don't think enough about that beginning.
I agree. These are very clear words, which is highly appreciated. Continuing this, how often should you practice with a young horse or a horse in this age?
I think for me, you must get each phase established before you move on, because certainly with the young horses, I don't believe in working them every day, but you must get something established. So you may need to ride it 1 or 2 or 3 days to establish what you're trying to get established. Then you can say, fine, now you can go out and do other things. Because I think it's very important that young horses do lots of other things to educate their whole mind about life.
So we have already heard that in the racing world they tend to start at 2. What's your opinion on this?
I personally have never started with 2-year-olds. I mean, I know in the racing world they certainly do, but I feel for our game they're not strong enough or established enough to be on sort of circles. With the racehorses, they're on straight lines and much more. They haven't got the pressure of the turns. Where with the dressage horse, so I personally wouldn't, or never have started earlier than 3.
Got it. And is there some sort of recipe for the development between 3 and 4-year-old?
Obviously, it's the development of each individual horse, but I think, again, one of the traps not to fall into is when you start with a 3-year-old, it's very easy to say, well, it's only 3, so I don't really do much with it. And very quickly, I've said so many clients, very quickly you'll find it's 5, 6, or 7, and you still haven't done anything. So you have to be very clear, what do you expect? And as I said, I expect it to respect the bit, to carry, to listen to the voice, to go forward when I want to stop and start. Just the basic principles of training young horses, and that needs to be reminded. I would, once I start riding them, I would do that maybe 3 times a week.
So, David, you have talked a lot about contact, about the acceptance of the bit, but you didn't talk a lot about quality.
I think one of the big problems with dressage, we try to do everything. We try to think of the rhythm, of the balance, of the contact, of the connection. You can't do all that. So I believe with young horses, you start to establish them individually. So you first establish the acceptance of a contact. In other words, they won't run through it and they respect it. I don't believe horses should be on the bit. I believe they should accept the bit. And they're very different things, because I think you can very easily have a horse in a shape and think he's on the bit because he's in a shape. But for me, if the horse doesn't buy into it mentally, then it's not really where you want it, because there's a massive difference of when a horse buys into the contact and he understands and he focuses, and you can give the reins and retake and he happily stays there. But if he's there under pressure, he's not really accepting what you're asking, and therefore, the message that gets through takes much longer. So I think early on, I try to establish that they accept the contact.
Nicely said. And can you give the audience a couple of hints? What do you do to establish this contact?
Well, I think that one mustn't be afraid of a horse coming behind the contact. With a young horse, when they first test it, they will obviously push against it, and therefore they must first learn when they push against it that it doesn't give. If they realize it doesn't give, because for me the horse has to learn self-reward. So if they push against the bit, the rider or the contact mustn't give. The horse learns to relax and come slightly behind it, and then it's what I call it rewards itself. So when it pushes it, it blocks it. But when it relaxes, it realizes the pressure goes away. But the horse has taken the pressure away, not the rider. The trap is that the rider takes the pressure away. So the horse hasn't really accepted it. The horse maybe, as I said, maybe in the shape, but it hasn't actually come to terms with it. And that's one of the biggest keys that people don't quite understand clearly enough.
Well, that sounds more like the horse made the rider accept the bit, but we completely got that this isn't supposed to be the case. And the horse should instead accept the bit and feel happy in its environment, feel calm, accept the bit, and relax itself that way, right?
That's my ultimate aim. I mean, my whole philosophy is that when you train a horse, that you have controlled freedom or accepted freedom. So I want to control the horse, but I want to be able to give it its freedom. So it knows that I can control it, but I'm not anchoring it. So it has this freedom, but yet it is still under my control.
Well, that's so interesting, and I know this leads a bit away from the central topic of this session, but I'm aware you are also involved in the design of the tests that the athletes and horses show out there. So what is your opinion on the current state of the 4-year-old test?
Well, I think this is an interesting topic because I think one of the things where there's a big problem, it's much less now than it was, that the young horse classes are, what are we looking for? When I judge a young horse class, and because I was originally started the young horse classes in England, I was looking to try to help people look for a horse to become a Grand Prix horse. But it's very much gone in a different direction, and it's gone for a flashy horse that is a very good sales proposition and is also a very good stallion for, again, using for mares and things, not necessarily a Grand Prix horse. Because it has encouraged too much flamboyance and sort of power and excitement, but that doesn't make it a top Grand Prix horse. So therefore, for me, I'm looking for, at the very beginning, for horses that move naturally and easily within themselves. They have to be comfortable in their own skin. And I want them to, if I was buying a horse, I want to see it that it trots in a very natural, easy way, bends all its joints, and it's comfortable in the balance itself. I don't want big, extravagant movement, because I think time has proved that the bigger the trot or the bigger the walk, the more difficult it is to compress it, because our ultimate aim is collection. So it has to have a certain natural ability to collect, rather than this big extravagance, which is what the fashion moved into. And I'm happy to say we're slightly moving back away from it, because I think we've realized through experience that it doesn't work, because a lot of the horses that win these big young horse championships don't go on to be Grand Prix horses. And I think we should learn lessons from that.
No, I agree. You often don't see them anymore afterwards, which is quite a shame. So far, we have looked at the early development of horses of the earliest ages, and I want to throw in a personal question here. And if you want to throw in any more questions, please send them through to questions@blackhorse-one.com, and you can also ask them. So my personal question here, David, is from my experience, I had a young horse, or I still have him, fortunately, which had quite a good walk. But I had difficulties preserving that good walk. So what can I do?
You see, I think that's interesting the way you've worded that, because you immediately put an emphasis on keep it rather than be able to work with it. I think a lot of people think you shouldn't interfere with the walk, and I totally disagree. If you can't interfere with the walk, then you have a problem. I think that for me it's worded wrong in a test, because the bigger the overtrack, the higher the mark. The higher the mark, obviously the rider thinks that it's better. But for a Grand Prix horse, I want a natural walk, that the horse uses all the body and it walks through the body. It has a nice overtrack, not a massive overtrack, because a big walk with a big overtrack is slow. And that is not what you want, because what I'm looking for in the walk is, as I shorten the walk, I don't want the energy to slow down. You need to teach the horse very early on, when you shorten the walk, it maintains the same energy that it had in the freer walk. So therefore, for example, when you have a free walk on a long rein, you pick up the contact, and that shouldn't affect the horse's energy and how much it's walking forward. It should start to walk into a shape. So the contact doesn't slow it down. It starts to change the shape of the horse. As the horse pushes from behind, it steps up into the bridle, and therefore the whole shape changes, but the energy levels don't change. Because ultimately I want the energy levels to increase, not decrease. But if you look at the average person, you look at the average rider, when they take up the reins, the horse immediately slows down. So therefore, but I think this happens in a lot of exercises, that when you start to compress a horse, the first reaction is it slows down. Well, it shouldn't slow down. It should shorten and become actually a little more energetic. But of course, this is one of the big keys to be able to train a top horse.
That is so interesting. Now, the ultimate goal of this symposium is to train a young horse all the way up to a Grand Prix champion, at least in our minds. So, how important is it that they get very good marks as young horses in young horses classes, and how interested are you in these flashy movements?
I think very much, when I judge, people sometimes confused, because I don't go for the big open flashy mover, because I really look to see how the horse conducts itself. I mean, for example, when a horse goes from walk to trot, whether it can pick up immediately with the front legs, whether it can go boom boom, or whether it wants to stretch before it picks up. Most horses stretch first and then pick up. But because the whole purpose of training for me, and this is why you start it very early on, is when you ask it to go forward, it learns to come up and forward. Its reaction is to go up and forward, not forward and then up. Because forward and then up has the shoulder low. If they learn to pick up and step forward, then the shoulder comes up first. Because it doesn't matter how good your engine is. If your engine's good, but it shoves it smack into the front, then you're creating trouble right from the word go.
And do you achieve this through a well-established contact, or are there any more hints?
Through the acceptance of the contact. And you must be very conscious of this. So I teach my riders very early on, of course not at 4 years old. At 4 years old they need to, as I said, accept the shape and be happy with the shape, listen to the rider, and then they need to go out hacking and go cantering in between their training days. So they need to see the world, they need to experience and have a lot of space to go forward. But when you come into the arena, one mustn't misinterpret forwardness. I would probably start my horses slower than most people, because I think you need to establish the rhythm. I mean, obviously nowadays the breeding is becoming so good. There are many horses that automatically have a rhythm. but you still must be very conscious because that rhythm can vary in length. And you have to try and train the horse to stay at the same size steps, because the same size steps keeps a balance. Because people often ask, how do you interpret a balance? How do you know when your horse is in balance? For me, it's if the horse can measure, if you can measure the size steps it takes, and then they are equal all the time, not just the rhythm, it's the size steps, then you know your horse is in balance, because it can keep itself in the same frame and it doesn't push against the bit. The minute the steps vary, the contact will vary. The two run very close together. That's why training Grand Prix is, when you really start to understand it, a lot more logical than people realize.
Quickly coming back to the topic of hacking, is this for mental purposes only, or also to be sure about the steps that you as a horse take, or what is behind this?
Well, I think they need to see the world, see different things, see rabbits popping out of the hedge, and get used to still focusing on the rider. And I think they still have to, when they go out hacking, I don't believe in them having a loose floppy rein and being allowed to do what they like. It mustn't be that they only come into a shape and accept the contact when they're in the white boards as such, or an indoor school. They still out hacking have to learn to be respectful, to be in balance, and to go in a good way. I think it's, a lot of people think that you should let them relax, but if they accept their work, they relax anyway. You don't need to throw the reins at them and let them do their own thing for them to be relaxed. This is, we're back to our acceptance. If they accept what you're asking, they will be relaxed, because acceptance brings relaxation. Trying to work for relaxation doesn't bring acceptance.
On the topic of getting this young horse to a Grand Prix level, what is the right time to join a competition for the first time? Should you do it as a 4-year-old, or should you wait?
It depends on the horse. Basically, again, it's if you've got control of it. And I believe, and I've been proved again and again, if the horse is accepting the contact, as I've said, at home, and he's been out hacking and he's used to everything, and he's used to, I don't believe in that, don't let that dog come here, or, making people keep it quiet. They've got to get used to that. If a dog runs into the arena, so what? Somebody drops a pulp, so what? They have to get used to that. And if they accept the control, you can take them to a show as 4-year-olds. And it's good for their education. It's good to see different surroundings, to see all the other horses coming at them. And then you start to develop an understanding of their temperament, how they react to different things. And how, you start to form a pattern as to whether you feel this horse is going to go to the top or not.
In your eyes, what's the main purpose of a young horses class?
Classes are educational more than they are. It's important to go and win them.
And it also helps to establish trust. So, to get the right contact, what kind of bit do you recommend? The straight up normal one that you're used to, or what is your recommendation here?
Normally, yes, a normal straight up bit, but I think we also have to be realistic, and some horses are very different in the mouth, and you shouldn't be afraid of having something a little bit stronger if they're, tear away things that grab the bit and try to rush off. They need to respect you, and they need to stay with that respect, because without that respect, then all sorts of problems arise from that, and that's very important. I think a contact is one of the most difficult things to explain to somebody. How do you explain to a person what is a contact? They have this perception that it should be soft, which is correct, but it should be soft through acceptance, not soft because you've taken a soft contact. That is a very different thing. And we're back to the same thing. If the horse accepts, for me, I would word it, when I take a feel of the horse's mouth, as the horse feels the pressure, its immediate reaction should be relax, give. it's very first. So therefore, when it does that, I'm in a position to be able to give the rein back and say, that's great. So he immediately gets rewarded. But if I take it and there's an immediate resistance there, and I have to fight that resistance, we've already started off with a lot of tension in the body. So my whole theme is that every time I give away the reins and retake, the horse softens to the touch, to the retake.
Are you doing this fairly often during a lesson, or is this just for relaxing purposes?
A contact. I mean, I have this. This may sound really strange, but for me, one of the best ways to get an inexperienced rider to understand a contact is, funnily enough, in Piaffe, because if you hold too much, the horse will stand up or go. If you give too much, it runs away. And it teaches you at a very slow pace the independence of to hold a little bit, but then there's a quickly allowing. Because the same thing again, you see, because this word acceptance and having a contact, all the books say that you should have a constant elastic contact. Well, I think one of the important things to understand is a contact is the first killer of energy. The more you hold it, the horse can build into it. So if your contact is steady, the horse can build, that can get stronger and stronger, and that in itself blocks the energy coming through the body. So I'm wanting an acceptance that the horse, as I said, relaxes and gives to it, that I can give back. So there's this independence. So he's in his own frame and independently. I'm independently sitting on the saddle, but we're working together because I can touch his mouth and get a response. I can give it to him to give him his freedom, but it's a controlled freedom. So I don't give it away for too long that he stretches away from me. I just allow him a little bit so he keeps the frame and keeps the respect.
So this could also be a matter of seconds or split seconds, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Split seconds.
Coming back to the topic of Piaffe now, I know this is a luxury situation if you can learn it on a horse that already knows what to do. But in our journey here, we have looked at 3 years old, we have looked at 4 years old, we are now 5 years old. Is this the right time to start with Piaffe, or what is your opinion on this?
For me, Piaffe is a tool. It's not an end in itself. Because Piaffe is, believe it or not, is a very easy thing for a horse. It's not difficult. It depends on how you introduce it to the horse. Because I say to my clients, the difference is if I'd say to you, get off your horse and run across the school in as big as strides as you can and see how quickly you get exhausted. Now just jog on very small steps and you could go round and round and round the school forever. So, and that is all I'm asking with a horse when I start the Piaffe, that he learns just to take small little steps, no pressure, no energy required. I don't want this any done. I'm not looking for Piaffe as such, which brings me to another issue, which is quite interesting. I often say I don't believe that we should ever use the word Piaffe or use the word pirouette in training, because it immediately puts a perception in a rider's mind. So if I say to an inexperienced rider, right, let's try Piaffe, now they've immediately have a perception of what Piaffe is. So their body language to the horse immediately asks for something that the horse doesn't understand, can't give. So the rider gets the feeling from themselves, not from the horse. The way I teach Piaffe is that you train the horse to walk smaller and smaller, maintaining the energy. And the smaller the steps the horse learns to take, if you then, and the horse starts to come behind you a little bit, you touch it to go forward, it starts to get energy in its body, and you find it automatically starts to pick up its feet. because that's the first thing. You've got to get it, when you apply a little energy, that it lifts its feet instead of locks its joints. But so I'm training my rider to think only of an energetic walk. I'm not saying this word piaffe, because, as I say, then the body, they're not looking for something that won't happen. Because a good piaffe doesn't feel like you think it should. A good piaffe feels very little. All you feel is the energy in the body. You don't feel this dynamic thrust, which we all think it feels like. And that's really important to start with your young horse, because you're then not demanding something of it that it doesn't understand and can't give you. It's a progression.
So I understand this. The impulse is coming from the rider, and there is no help from the ground or from the outside.
Sometimes, I think sometimes with some young horses, it's good to start them in hand to get the idea in their head. But I don't find that necessarily very often, one. And secondly, I think when a person starts the horse with the stick, the horse associates it with the person there, stood there. And that's why then when they're alone, the horse doesn't piaffe. Because the piaffe comes from the association with a person stood there with a whip that encourages it. What the rider has to learn to do is to create his own energy, because piaffe is only just energy, controlled energy. It's nothing more complicated than that.
So you describe it in such a way that it makes it sound very easy.
It is, and you'd be surprised how easy they pick it up going on this theme. But you will also surprised, as I know you're in the horse world like I am, if you watch horses and you watch them shorten the walk, how the whole mechanism slows down. And this is the key. You don't let it slow down. And immediately it shows the inclination to slow down. That's the time you can give it a tiny touch with the whip, just a little flick, and it reacts, and it realizes it can react upwards. And very quickly, you'd be surprised if you have a horse that's in a good balance and is willing to go forward and is accepting the contact, they very quickly start to energize and give you a few little steps.
And how do you make it distinguish between a collected walk and the very energetic short walk?
Well, because you then don't give it the extra touch from behind. And sometimes they will offer you steps when you don't want it. But that doesn't matter. When they get established and get to understand it, that goes away. And this is where we're back to, not being able to work on the walk. I believe you have to be able to work on the walk. You should be able to shorten the walk, lengthen the walk, without there being any issue. And I think if the horse accepts the contact, not on the bit, then it will do that.
So I'm aware I've asked this question earlier, but I'll try again. So what is the right age to start with this very energetic walk?
It's very much reliant on the acceptance of the contact and that. Once they accept that, you very quickly find yourself, I can just jiggle a few little steps here. Because remember, they're like children. They pick up things very quickly. The younger they are, the older they get, the more complicated it becomes. But again, we have this perception that piaffe is the ultimate, and I don't believe it is, because I use it all the time later on as a tool to shorten and get some energy to prepare for something. And it's a perfect preparation, because it's training the horse to become energetic within control without telling it off or getting after it, so you're not got the tension there.
Mirroring this to canter, we have a 5-year-old. We as riders might want to do a counter canter. We might want to do flying changes, but counter canter and flying changes, this is a bit of a contrast to me.
Well, again, I think that the flying change comes before the counter canter, because horses don't go in the field counter-canter with a nice bend to the leading leg. They naturally do a flying change. It's far more natural for them to do a change than it is counter-canter. So I don't quite understand spending years trying to teach them to stay on that leg, and then suddenly, because they get either a certain amount of points or a certain age, that you suddenly think they're going to just change legs, because they're not. But the same applies in the canter as it does the walk. You need to be able to shorten and energize the canter in order that the horse becomes more buoyant. And it's so this is where it's so important that you are so clear in your thinking and feeling of the 3-beat canter, because without the canter being a clear 3-beat, your timing makes it very complicated with the timing. But if you have a very clear 3-beat, then the timing becomes much easier to find the time to ask for the flying change in that moment of suspension. But if your horse is in 4-beat or like a centipede, then there is no moment of suspension, so you can't find that moment to be able to put the aid on.
So imagining that the horse doesn't know about what I really want when I ask for a flying change, how do I start?
When I first teach the flying change, I'm quite happy that they anticipate it a bit. You need anticipation. You need controlled anticipation, because you can't get the horse to be totally relaxed and then suddenly put an aid and it's just going to go, oh yes, I'll do a change. Of course, the horse hasn't a clue what you're talking about. But if the horse learns to get a little edgy, a little bit excited, it's slightly very reactive. So therefore, when you put the aid on, it jumps a little bit away, which is perfect. So it learns very quickly. But what I also teach them is that I want a small, easy change. I don't want a big change. So I don't allow them to change as such. I contain them to change. Rather like a strike off to canter. When I strike off to canter, I expect, and they feel the aid, the first thing is to lift. And this again comes when you come to the change, when their aid comes on them, their first reaction, because they've been trained, is to lift and not step away. So here we are back to our transitions from walk to trot. We've taught the horse right the way through. When the aid comes on, it must lift first and take the step forward. When it comes to the flying change, the horse comes up first. So therefore it doesn't fire out away from you. It doesn't matter, they don't have to be clean, perfect changes every time. All you're wanting is the immediate reaction when you ask the horse for the change. I normally do it in the same place at the very, very beginning, so they can associate it with a certain turn, just to help them so they get to understand, oh yes, gosh, now I know what's coming. That's good they know that's coming then. But there has to be a preparation, because if you don't want to do a change, you don't do the preparation, so the horse doesn't think about it. He thinks about it because he feels the preparation. That's when he starts to anticipate, but you have induced that anticipation.
So comparing this to our German system, for us this is quite clear. You start with a counter canter, and then the next year, next level, or maybe 2 years afterwards, you then do flying changes, but you no longer do a lot of counter canter, and you definitely don't do flying changes beforehand. Now, after listening to you, this seems counterintuitive and maybe even wrong.
Well, I think it's not the fact that it's wrong. I've just tried to find through experience that the easiest way, and I find that, as I said, that it's natural for a horse to do a change. So I'd rather teach it pretty early on and then teach it not to do it. So teach it, then to wait. Don't worry about it. Because once they picked it up and they understand what you're talking about. But I've seen lots of, horses later on in life never really getting it because they're late. Because once they've learnt to go late in a relaxed way, again, some people will say, a change should feel as smooth as silk. Well, no, it shouldn't. You should feel a jump. Because if it feels smooth as silk, I promise you it's late behind. It should have a jump to it. And that's why you need this slightly bunched energy. And as I say, I would rather get that over with. So as 4-year-old, easily 4 or 5, I would teach them a change each way, let them get that so they understand what it is. Then I can say, okay, now they know that now. I don't need to go there. Now I can teach them to stay on the leg for as long as I want to.
So how important is the counter canter for you?
Yeah, I think it's very important. Yeah, I do. I think it's a very good suppling exercise, and I think it's very important that the horse remains completely with you and is very stable in that 3 beat on whichever leg you've asked it. 100%.
Okay, so now in my mental picture, this horse is 6-year-old. It already has learned quite a bit. It can do counter canter. It learned a flying change. It might have done a couple of steps of Piaf, energized walk. And now this is a weird age for me if you want to compete internationally. So to compete, you still need to really focus on quality, because this is a quality first test after all, or am I mistaken?
No, but I think, if we've started as we've gone from 3, 4, 5, and we've had the acceptance all the time. It's not difficult for a horse to learn these things. It's all about how you teach them and what situation mentally and physically they're in when you start to ask these questions. But I mean, I would expect my horse to be 1 or 2 or not 3 levels above what I'm competing it at, so that it, does those other, when it's 6 years old, like mediums and things. The thing I'd like to bring in here is that I think I have a slightly different opinion. Although we have to have rhythm, and rhythm is the base of dressage. Once you understand that as a rider or a trainer, you realize it doesn't have to be there all the time, and it's beneficial to take it out of that sometimes. For example, if I say a shoulder in, if you get so caught up in that it must maintain the same rhythm, you'll find the horse will move itself away from the track. So the aid encourages it to pull away from the wall. So the horse has lost its original line you've put it on. So therefore that shoulder in is not a good exercise that's helping the horse physically develop. My perception, or how I trained it, is that the hind legs must stay in the track. So you come on the long side, you take the front legs off a little, but the hind legs stay on that track. And that's the key important. You keep those hind legs regardless if the horse loses the rhythm. Because when the horse accepts that line, the rhythm comes back immediately. But if you let the rhythm guide you, especially with an inexperienced rider, the horse can pull itself away from the wall and you realize you've moved off your original line. So therefore the hind leg isn't stepping through and under and helping you.
I will have to think about this. This is something that comes unexpected to me.
But I promise you the rhythm will come back immediately. Because it's the same thing as acceptance again. So immediately the horse accepts that the angle I put it on, it will stay on it. Then it relaxes and therefore the rhythm comes straight away back again. But if your feeling and your perception is you've got to keep thinking of the rhythm, and therefore if the horse comes to come off the wall and you stop it, it will disturb the rhythm. So therefore your automatically mind thinks it's wrong because the rhythm's been disturbed. And I'm saying, no, that doesn't matter with a young horse. You're training it to stay in the same angle as you have decided. You don't let the horse decide what the angle is and how far it comes on or off.
Can you elaborate a little on this?
And people say shoulder in is one of the most difficult, and it really is till you really understand it. Because shoulder in, it's the outside shoulder in, not the inside shoulder. We see too many shoulder ins where the horse is just flexed to the inside, but actually it's falling out through the left shoulder. If you're doing a right shoulder in, it's the outside shoulder that has to come in off the track and accept it. So in order to train riders and horses to do that, I changed from shoulder into renvers. So we switched the bend and make sure that as you switch the bend, the shoulder stays in the same place. And it's easier to get the outside shoulder in control if you bend it the other way. And then you take the bend back again, but don't let the shoulder fall back. So it's an exercise that makes you very conscious of where the shoulders are.
I often do this with mine too, but I'm a bit concerned that I might overdo it, that it might be too tough on the joints. But I guess if the muscles have developed correctly, this is all good, and you, as a rider, have the responsibility of feeling how much you can do, how much you should do, and not overdo it.
So my whole principle is here that the horse has an acceptance of the balance, the acceptance of the trot. It's comfortable in this trot. I'm not demanding more, that it's a bigger trot, more expressive. I want it to learn these things in a very easy, naturally athletic, supple way, but not some big, powerful, big steps. I'm not wanting that. I'm wanting the horse to learn these movements. See, for me, the basic is that a horse feels 100% comfortable with the pace, each pace. So you must be able to walk, trot and canter with the horse totally accepting the pace in which it's in. One of the biggest problems in dressage is we want more. So if you say to somebody, what's that trot like? Oh yeah, I'd like to see more from behind, more from behind. So to me, that message is to the horse, you're constantly never satisfied with what the horse is giving you. You're always at it, because you want more, you want more. Where I say that my horse can only give this at the moment, that's all I want from him. So the horse completely can relax and say, oh good, that's all I need. So I then can move the horse into other areas, like shoulder in or travers or half pass or leg yield, and he becomes out of his comfort zone. And I try to teach him that that becomes his comfort zone too. But if he gets a little bit nervous or loses the rhythm and gets tense, and that, I can immediately put him on a circle and it's straight back again. He's straight away back to his comfort zone, and then I can go back to it. But I have to understanding I need this comfort zone. I need this place to take him to whenever I have a problem. I can immediately go there and he immediately says, whew, that's okay, good, no problem.
I often hear that you always should ask more from your horse. Every time you are happy, you should ask more. But I also get that this isn't always the right point and probably not the right way to do things. Coming back to passage, do you develop this from a trot or from the energized walk?
No, I started from trot. Again here, I think we have to think long term. And for me, a piaffe and a passage are one of the same thing. Your passage shouldn't be a big, floaty, slow, elevated trot. It can feel very nice, but if you look at that and you study that and then you think about what is a piaffe, and you've got to think, how can I transform the horse from one to the other? You look at the big passage, you think, wow, no way. That's how I look at it. So I teach the horse to learn to passage the same thing in a neat, easy up off the floor, not out big with too much suspension at the beginning. It's just got to learn to go boom, 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 boom. Because I want, I've got to be able to see a passage and see, gosh, I know that horse can piaffe. I don't want to look at a passage and think, whoa, I know that's going to have a problem. There's no way. But I don't think a lot of people don't understand. You should work understanding the two, that they've got to merge into each other and they've got to be of the same. So the pattern of it, the way they pick their legs up has to be the same in both. One is just a compression of the other.
So I get how to compress a passage into a piaffe. But for me, the most difficult part is to get out of this piaffe back into the passage.
But then that means your piaffe is not forward. The horse is going into piaffe and shutting back at you. And that's where we're back to the collected walk. You've trained the horse right from the word go that it's a forward movement. And that therefore, because I'm not looking for the feeling of piaffe, see, once I'm thinking of piaffe in my head, when the horse starts to pick up its feet in the diagonals, it normally stops going, it doesn't go forward. But it doesn't matter. You don't think it matters because you're feeling the rhythm of the piaffe. So you're really excited about that. But the horse is already learning to shut back on you. Where I don't want that to happen. I want my horse to always feel that it can come forward. So I can always come out of it whenever I want. So I can shorten the walk, get a few jiggle steps, walk away. And then therefore it doesn't learn to shut back in the piaffe. Because for me, a piaffe is then I want to be able to get my passage and compress my passage, compress it and press it, and then it becomes stationary. Then it becomes on the spot as such. Although it's always moving, we're allowed to move. We use the word on the spot. Judges do not expect it to be on the spot. The rule says it is allowed to move half a hoof print per diagonal. And therefore it is a forward movement, but it is obviously a minimal distance. But you must always have that in mind, that the horse has this forward feeling about it. And then the transitions out are dead easy because the horse is already still thinking forward. But again, it's not, as I said before, getting this piaffe in your head, what the piaffe feels like, or a pirouette. It's the same with a pirouette. You should be able to come out of a pirouette at any point. With my horses, I could take 2 steps to the side, 2 steps forward, 2 to the side, 2 forward, 2 to the side, 2 forward. So the horse will come out whenever I want. I can take 6 steps sideways and go 1 out. So it's the same principle. I don't let it lock me into this circle, as I don't let the horse and the piaffe lock me into this movement on the spot.
Well, this also helped me quite a lot, this star-shaped movement. 2 strides forward, 1 or 2 backwards, or feeling backwards, obviously not actually backwards. But this helps quite immensely, I think.
But again, the whole thing is about controlling the size steps. So we're back to my baby horse that has a rhythm, but I'm controlling the size steps it takes. I'm not letting it decide what size it does. And that applies in the pirouette. I want the horse to maintain the 3-beat canter and a regulated size step. So when I start to turn it, it doesn't sweep into a great big sweeping step, because then the horse is taken over. So I've really lost control. Okay, so I've gone with it because I'm doing this pirouette thing. But I should be controlling each size step. So it takes it stays with me, takes another one, stays with me. I want to go forward, now it goes with me, same size step. So it's again more developing the control of the size step. And when you can take it forward and backwards, than it is coming to this so-called thing and then letting the horse do this thing because this thing feels different. No, it shouldn't.
This is so helpful, and I hope everybody can take something home with them for the future trainings. So looking at the clock, we are unfortunately running out of time a little bit, but I want to have one more look at the overall picture. In your opinion, what makes a good young horse? I gathered the acceptance of the bit.
I've always believed we all talk about a horse being through, but I think understanding what a horse being through is very difficult, because a horse being through is both mentally and physically with you, but mentally, that's the key. So it's very hard to find a horse that you can assess how much mentally it will be with you at the beginning. It's a relationship, whether it will let you build a relationship. You know, when I was young, I bought many horses that were spectacular, beautiful horses, beautifully balanced, but I didn't understand the mind then, and they mentally wouldn't let you ride them through. The horse, that's what I mean. If the horse doesn't buy into it, or you don't understand getting a horse to buy into what you're trying to do with it, then you're always up against the mind of the horse. So therefore, the horse has to have developed quite a long way into its training before you start to realize whether the horse will mentally buy into you, whether you can form this relationship with it, or whether it's just an animal you're trying to keep in the shape and do some tricks with it, because that is a whole different ball game. That is not top sport.
So if I'm going out to purchase my next superstar 3-year-old, what am I looking for?
Well, you have to look at its reactions from when you first walk in the stable. I remember the first expensive horse I bought. When I walked into the stable, the horse was stood in the back of the stable with its head quite high, slightly wary of me. And if I tell you 20 years later, it still did the same thing. And that affected its training. But I was too young and too ignorant to realize. And things like that, when you go into the stable. I mean, the old-fashioned English show people. For example, when a horse has a wind, and they have to have a tie back because they have a restriction in the airways. One of the ways the old guys learnt was if you walked into a stable with a 3-year-old and you threw its hat at the horse would jump, and if it grunted, it meant that it had a wind problem. So they're just things you learn through reactions of a horse, and therefore it's important when you go to see your 3-year-old how it reacts when you watch it in the stable. We see how it reacts towards you, what it's like in its eye. And again, when you watch it, for example, I like to see them loose, but I don't like to see them with people with a piece of plastic on the end of a stick rattling it around. I want to see how it naturally trots around, and I want to see that it will naturally pick up into canter rather than show a lengthening of its step, because immediately the horse wants to stretch rather than lift, and I want the horse to naturally lift. So it's trotting around, something spooks it, pops into canter. Those are little things like that, and things like you must always make sure that the hind legs, each joint bends in the canter, because they don't always. You can have a horse that trots and it's really bending its hocks and its fetlock, everything goes into canter, and it doesn't bend the hock, it bends the fetlock and the hip, but it doesn't bend the actual hock. And you must look for that, because that is what gives you the compression. If a horse naturally bends in the joint, in the hock joint, in canter, then it can easily bend and travel it underneath. But if you think about it, if it doesn't bend that joint, it has to swing it from the hip. They can still be successful horses, but the ones that can bend in that joint are much easier to train.
Now, David, I could fill hours asking you questions. This was so interesting, and I'm sure there will be many more questions in the discussion round, which is tomorrow, and we will see you again there. If you at home have any questions, please send them to questions@blackhorse-one.com, and we will resume very shortly.